welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. Hello and welcome to a very special Easter episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. And the reason I wanted to do this is often it's a hot topic with a lot of patients and clients around this time of year. It's going to be really tricky, especially as people often struggle with trigger foods like chocolate, which are really prominent this time of year. So actually, I thought it'd be really useful to discuss potentially some of the pitfalls, some of the tools and tips I use a lot with clients to help people sort of manage to find their own balance today on Easter Sunday. So first of all would be ditching morality with food labels. And what do I mean by that? We want to have a thing called food neutrality where we're not seeing food as good or bad, but just food as food. So chocolate isn't good or bad, it is just food. This is supported by research, a 2016 study by Red, but lots of the sources as well, that found that labelling foods as good or bad can lead to restriction of those foods and cravings for the quote-unquote bad foods, potentially triggering overeating. What does that mean in real sense? If people are restricting their chocolate intake because they see it as bad foods, they're restricting foods that they enjoy and they're seeing it as bad, they'll probably crave it more often and actually have a poor relationship with that food, which means that they'll probably tend to overeat and have an all or nothing approach with it. So that might look like not being able to have chocolate in the house because it's naughty, but when you do have it, you go hell for leather and it lasts barely even a minute and you feel really bad, you feel really guilty and shameful, and it fuels that cycle when actually us not labelling it as good or bad can make it really, really beneficial, enjoyable, and more enjoyable experience for people. And that's why we're trying to have that neutral approach, that we have foods that are more nutrient dense, foods that are less nutrient dense. We might have foods for sort of health and well-being, physiological well-being, but we might have food for the soul as well, and that's what sort of chocolate falls into that label. It's not unhealthy, it's something that probably needs to be moderated, and we sort of have to find our own balance. It depends on the situation and the circumstance that you're in. So there's no black or white sort of approach to it. It's just something that I probably recommend to include little and often if you can. And this is what we say is trying to have that food neutrality approach to it. See it through a neutral lens. Simply food. Some are more nutrient dense than others, not inherently good or bad. This shift in perspective can lead you to actually enjoy these foods without the guilt or shame aspect, and allowing yourself some of the chocolate whenever you want might stop you from eating all the chocolate right now. And that's something that I often say to clients. So if you've got an Easter egg today and you feel that it's talking to you through the cupboard and you feel that you need to get out the house and have it all out because then it's out the house, actually something that I find that works with clients is increase their exposure to these foods. So if they struggle with chocolate, for example, we might say, right, I want you to have a piece of chocolate each day, maybe more than that. Give yourself permission to have as much as you want. And as we continue to do that, it tends to become less special, and people can tend to control their emotions and responses around it because it's not so restricted. They can have it whenever they want, and actually it gets to a point where they can take it or leave it. And that's where we want to get to, that you're choosing to have it rather than feeling that because you've only got this one opportunity to have it, you might as well make the most of it and have all of it at once, where you don't actually enjoy that process. So it builds a lot better relationship with that food. And another part of that is that there's food rules, that unwritten food rules around it, that you can only have chocolate Easter eggs at Easter and they need to be eaten all on an Easter Sunday. Actually, that is just nonsense. You can have an Easter egg whenever you want. You can have it later this week, you can have it before Easter, you can just have it whenever. And having that relaxed approach to it stops that all or nothing mentality, and saving yourself from having it all right now means that you can have some later and enjoy it just as much. What I tend to find is that if somebody has a share a bar of dairy milk, for example, if they've got this all or nothing approach with it, they tend to have it all in one go. They tend not really to enjoy it, taste it, savor it, and they feel guilty and shameful afterwards. When if we broke it down and had it across 5 sittings, for example, and really sat down and ate it more mindfully, which we'll cover in a second, it allows you to actually have 5 more enjoyable experiences. So actually you sit down and enjoy it. Often people who have these all nothing approaches with these foods never really enjoy them because they're either avoiding them because they feel guilty, shameful, and feel bad for wanting them, or when they have them, they feel guilty and shameful because they've eaten them all in one go and they can't control themselves around it, when actually there's a real simple way of allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to have it more often. So next up, mindfulness. We've discussed this, and it's not this wishy-washy thing. It's something that actually works, and it allows you to savor it, enjoy it, and treat it as a really enjoyable experience. So studies by Kabat-Zinn, who's one of the OGs, one of the leaders in mindfulness, but there are many more mindful-based interventions that have supported this as well, have highlighted the benefits of mindful eating. Reduced stress eating, reduced emotional eating, improved weight management, better enjoyment of food, and reduced binging, among many other aspects as well. So there's a huge amount of benefits to it. So what do I mean by mindful eating? Well, there's a great practice called the mindful raisin, which I won't talk you through, but you can Google it. It's a very, very useful practice that I use with people. And you can do it with the raisin, but you can do it with other foods as well. It's just a useful practice, and raisin's a really good place to start. So what is it? We pay attention to the texture, the flavour, the aroma, the flavour of the food. Even before we eat it, we might even have a look at the visual aspects. We might play with it in our hands. We might rub it along our lips. And it's getting used to the sensory experience of that food, but it also slows us down. Because if you've ever eaten a food for the first time, somebody's plated something up and you're not too sure that you'll like it, you'll probably have a very mindful experience of that, because you won't go both feet in, jump in first, eat it all in one go. You'll probably take a little bit off. You'll probably check it out with your eyes first. You might smell it, and then you might slowly chew it. And that's mindful eating. You'll see it with children all the time, especially when they've got new food. They might just play with it on their plate. They might not even eat it for the first couple of times. They might just get used to having it around them. And this slower approach helps us to be more in sense with internal cues around hunger and fullness, but actually allows us to enjoy the food. And what you'll tend to find as well is with these highly palatable foods are really tasty ones, chocolate being one of them, ice cream, pastries, chips, crisps, all these things, stuff that's really, really flavourful. The first bite is usually the best, and then it drops off a cliff very, very quickly. So as you go mouthful to mouth and you start eating more mindfully, you tend to get to a point where that buzz has sort of dimmed down a bit. And actually that's where you might be able to walk away, leave it, and then have that first bite experience later, a later date. And that's the amazing thing about mindful eating. So it's a really useful tool that I'd highly recommend. So have a look at the mindful raisin, really slow yourself down, thinking about the texture, aroma, flavour, taste of all these foods and how it changes as you eat them, or how it changes from being on your plate to actually swallowing it, how that experience changes. Do it with safer food potentially to start with, so foods that are not as triggering if you struggle with certain foods, but then trying it with more triggering foods later on and building that more mindful approach to eating them can be a really, really huge step forward for a lot of people in building a better relationship with those foods. So as we talk about that, trigger foods, there's certain strategies for moderation that'd be really useful. So foods that often tempt us, if you have triggered foods like chocolate eggs, you might have crisps, you might have sweets, anything like that you feel that you can't really moderate your behaviours around. Having them more mindful can be a really, really good approach, and especially today. So a 2018 review by Gearhart et al. Suggests that planning for occasional treats can be more effective for long-term weight management than strict restriction. And that's really beneficial. So like we said, with chocolate, people might only have it around a couple of times a year because they feel like it's a bad food. Actually having frequent exposure to them and enjoying them. If you don't enjoy them, that's completely fine, but there'll be foods that people say that they don't enjoy. They actually do, but they can't moderate their behaviours around them. So I don't like chocolate and then when you get into the depths of it, actually they do like it, but they have this very much all or nothing approach with it. When, like I said, if we can increase our exposure to them, so it's not as special, it's not as big an occasion, and actually it's just food, which it is, it can actually set you up for a better relationship long term, where you don't binge on it, you don't overeat, and instead of depriving yourself and potentially setting yourself up for a binge, allowing yourself a small mindful portion is probably the best way forward. And this is where quality over quantity becomes key. So more studies by Rolls et al. Suggest that focusing on satiety and enjoying the sensory experience of food can promote portion control, and that's something I often find with clients as well. So us having this more mindful experience, tuning into our hunger, seeing where we are on the scale of satisfied, not stuff, actually allows us to manage our portion control a lot better. So having a small piece of your favourite dessert more often, focusing on the texture, taste, smell, all these things rather than rushing through a larger portion, allows you to enjoy the treat without overindulging, and that And again, allows us to do it more often, have a more positive relationship with it, and also get to a point where it isn't so easy to overeat on, that we can build a better relationship with it. Last but not least on my sort of tips for today, and this sort of is at the core of most things that I work on a lot with patients and clients, is aligning with your values. What truly matters to you? Easter is about more than just chocolate eggs and food. It's about actually potentially spending time with your family. It might be creating memories, and there might be a few things that you want to ask yourself, and that is, what's most important to you this Easter? Is it spending time with loved ones? Is it creating lasting memories? Is it enjoying some time with people that potentially you might have much more time left with, which is a really sad thought, but often these are great times to get people together. So having a look at what really matters to you, and you might actually think that the food aspect sits further down the list than you might initially have thought. So reflecting on your values can help obviously see what's most important. So when you're sitting down with that lunchtime meal, that evening meal potentially, or those chocolate eggs with people around you, you're not so worried about that. You're more worried about probably about having those conversations, spending time with them, doing things together, than actually having a all or nothing approach to those chocolate eggs in front of you. So hopefully there's a few things there to sort of trigger a few thoughts and feelings that might be useful today, but I thought it'd be a useful topic to cover. So I look forward to speaking to you on the next episode. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.